some summons had been couched in such a way as to make not appearing impossible. Aside from all else, his grandmother Horatia, his grandfather George, and his great-aunt Helena would have been shocked if he hadn't shown his face. So he'd gone and whiled away the day in the bosom of the wider Cynster clan, and as usual had spent most of his time consorting with his cousinly peers, with Sebastian, Michael, Marcus, Lucilla, Prudence, and their spouses. This year, that group had also included Louisa and her husband, Drake Varisay. Other than a few of the recently added spouses, Christopher had known the members of that group literally all of their lives. He'd even known Drake and Antonia, Sebastian's wife, from their earliest years. Yet now he was very definitely the odd man out, the only one unwed. Not that the others had so much as alluded to that, for which he'd been grateful, but their elders hadn't been anywhere near as reticent. Virtually every one of them had arched a brow and inquired when he was going to bestir himself and find a wife. He'd smiled and avoided answering the question. Previously, he would have concocted some faintly jocular reply, gently suggesting they should lay aside any expectation of seeing him front the altar. But this year, all such glib assertiveness had deserted him. Something had changed. Over the past year, some part of his psyche he hadn't known he possessed had awakened, stirred, and stretched, and now actively wanted the sort of future his peers had secured, one with a spouse by his side and a family of his own. Until now, he'd assumed he wouldn't marry. That, along with Prue, he would be one of the two in their group who would happily face the future unwed. He'd seen himself as the bachelor uncle to his siblings' children, the one overseeing the family finances, to be ultimately succeeded by his brother's son. To his mind, there had been no reason for him to marry, no need to risk love and the complications it brought, the emotional vulnerabilities it entailed. With her adamantine refusal to consider marrying, Prue had been, he'd thought, of the same mind, and if she, a female, could hold firm against the inevitable pressures brought to bear by their parents, aunts, and grandparents, then so could he. But then Prue had travelled to Ireland and changed her mind. Or Deglin Fitzgerald, Earl of Glengarra, had changed it for her. No. Christopher knew that not even Glengarra had the power to sway Prue once she'd made up her mind. Prue had met her fate in Glengarra. She'd accepted that, and with what had appeared to be clear-sighted alacrity, had embraced the future fate had placed before her. Christopher had danced at Prue's wedding, and had left feeling just a little betrayed. Not by Prue, but by fate. By fate's intervention that had led to Prue finding happiness and what was patently her true place, and by contrast, throwing into stark relief the restless, dissatisfied yearning that had, by then, sunk its claws into his soul. On returning from Ireland, he'd attempted to reclaim the life he'd once found satisfying. He'd thrown himself into socializing with his friends, and had attended several early summer shooting parties in the north. Nothing he'd done had eased the yawning emptiness inside him. If anything, it had grown more distracting, more compelling. In late July, he'd returned to London to celebrate his birthday with his parents and siblings, then had waved his parents off on their journey to America, before coming down to Kent to take up the reins at the manor. After settling into the familiar rhythms of summer in the country, he'd reluctantly headed to Somersham. He'd returned late last night, now brooding over his hours at the place, on all he'd seen and felt.